boats are volunteer. Uh, Now, boats were coming this way from, well, from Providence to Toledo in 1840. That's when they opened that particular section of the canal. The first section of the Miami Erie was opened in 1825. That was down near Cincinnati, from Middletown to Cincinnati. And this was one of the later ones that was built, and it was finished in 1840. It wasn't until 1843 that you could go all the way to, well, you could go all the way to Fort Wayne on this canal, because originally this was part of the Wabash Erie Canal that went through Indiana. And this route would take you, after 1843, it would take you over to Fort Wayne, and then down to the Ohio River in Indiana. But in 1845, they finished the last bit of the Miami and Erie Canal, so then you could either go to Fort Wayne or down to Cincinnati on this boat. So now, this canal was originally engineered, surveyed, and built by some of the same people who built the original Erie Canal, the one that opened in 1825. So this canal is built to many of the same specifications, the canal itself and our lock. So this is as close as you can get now to riding on the original Erie Canal. Before they enlarged the locks and lengthened them and widened the canals so they could fit heavier boats out there. In fact, let me sing you a little song, part of a song that tells you a little bit about the the Miami and Erie Canal. I'll just sing a few verses of it. From Lake Erie down to the Ohio River, pulled along by 2 mules at 4 miles an hour, bringing commerce and settlers to the western frontier on the Miami and Erie Canal. We've been on the canal for 2 days or 3, going up to Lake Erie from Cincinnati. We paid 3 cents a mile for the ride and some eats, while the mules rested midship in their very own suite. We were told of the navvies who worked with shovels and picks for 30 cents a day to dig this big ditch. They ate cornbread and beans washed down with some whiskey, and they lay down to sleep in their small wooden shanties. They dug this canal, it was 40 feet wide, then cleared out the towpath 10 feet on each side. There were 103 locks that took the boats up and down, and they were pulled by 2 mules, just poked along. At the Providence lock, local farmers came by, selling fresh produce for our dinner that night. At Waterville, our boat pulled up to the dock, and we went into Rupp's Canal store with money to shop. Just a 6-hour ride from Waterville home. The night has come on and we see the full moon shining down on this great Ohio water highway in our green and white packet on the way to Lake Erie. From Lake Erie down to the Ohio River, pulled along by 2 mules at 4 miles an hour, bringing commerce and settlers to the western frontier on the Miami and Erie Canal. Now, normally, we'd get this close to a lock, and this boat wouldn't be over by the side here, it'd be right out in the middle of the canal. And it'd be lining up the bow stem up there, with the middle of the lock, so that we could glide right in. Well, we can't do that now because between the time that the canal closed in 1913 and when we started the canal experience in the 1990s, they put this bridge in here, and so the Department of Transportation allowed us to open it far enough so that we can get the boat through, and so we have to go into the lock on an angle. They never had to do that back then. You always, there was a big basin there, And it's wide enough so that, like I said, boat can just line up and slide right in. But the lock is like a stair step in the canal. So if you were going from Toledo to Cincinnati, you'd be going up over 300 feet till you got to the Loramie Summit at New Bremen. And then at the end of the summit, at Lockington, and going down to Cincinnati, you'd go down over 500 feet. And if you were in your house and you were going upstairs or down to the cellar, you'd be using stair steps. Well, that's what these locks are, these stair steps in the canal. Really, they're nothing but little rooms. They're 80 feet long, 15 feet wide, because the boats back then were 78 feet long and 14 feet wide. So they just fit in there. And there are gates at both ends, big gates. They're called whaler gates or miter gates. And they weigh 3.5 tons apiece. They look a little bit like this washboard. And up on top of those gates, there are handles. And those handles are attached to gates that are under the water. They're called wicket gates. Now that little splash you heard, that was just us disconnecting from the mules because we have to go into the lock on our own power. That was so the mules didn't get tangled up in the ropes and fall in. It also slowed the speed down so that it was easier for the crews and for the lockmaster to be able to catch the ropes and tie us up and keep us from going through the other end there. But those handles up on top of the gates are attached to those wicket gates that are under the water. And when we pull those handles, those wicket gates turn sideways just like that. That's what lets the water in and out of this lock. So, you can see these big gates right here. Now they look like they're ancient, but they're not. They're only 7 years old, these ones. They'll last about 10 years until we have to put new ones in. So right now we're at the low water mark. Providence Lock, Lock 44 North on the Miami and Erie Canal, or Lock 9 on the Wabash and Erie. It only has a 3.5-foot lift, so we'll only go up or down 3.5 feet. The reason for that is the next level takes us right onto the Maumee River, and that's where we need to go. Yep, make sure you keep your hands and your heads, your feet, your neighbors, keep everything inside the boat, because when we close those doors behind us and tie this boat up, and let the water in, this boat's going to go backwards and forwards and sideways. It's going to hit one wall, maybe two, maybe more than once. We never know. It's always different. But keep your hands inside the boat and your head inside the boat. You're not going to have to worry about us hitting the wall. Otherwise, have your hand out there and you will have to work just a little bit. Because it'll break your hand. Alright, I'm going to go up top side and help this lock through. And in the meantime, just keep your hands inside the boat. If you want to get up and walk up to the front there, you're welcome to. Just once again, keep your hands inside the boat and your head. Alright? I'll be back in just a moment.
Here, they're both. Don't touch. Give mommy a second. She'll lift it up. Yeah. You see it, baby? Don't touch. Alright, so should we run back this way? Come on, Frank. No.
stay down in there.
Oh yeah.
A couple of them already went down.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Skylar. Watch where you're going, baby.
Just as long as I keep going through, I'm all right.
No, they work. They're working. This is their work day.
The end of the lock here, and then they pull the hook back up to the mules and be on the way.
And we save money on gym memberships this way.
Plank means to hook back up to the mules, so they hear that and they start walking.
You believe this is the building that we were just in?
The Isaac Ludwig Mill was here when the canal was running. So this is the only place in the country where you can take a mule-driven replica canal boat and still do business at a place that was doing business the same way back when the canal was running. Back until about 1878, this was just a sawmill. And in 1878, they built the grist mill operation on there, so it was both. And then by 1889, it was just grist mill. Grist mill, that just means that they make flour out of whatever grain you bring in. So if you brought in buckwheat, you get buckwheat flour. If you brought in wheat, you get wheat flour. Cornmeal, or corn flour. And
You didn't say buckwheat. Buckwheat. Oh, look, where did you find this? She waved.
now this railroad bridge, the first railroad bridge was built here in 1876 for the Toledo and Grand Rapids Narrow Gauge Railroad. And in 1916, they built this particular bridge for the railroads. Railroads changed names quite often during that time period. But the ice flows in one spring knocked out that first bridge, first railroad bridge. Now, the next lock going west here would have been the Buckland Lock. The Buckland Lock still exists. It's a mile and a quarter from the west of the Providence Dam, and it's just a little turnoff on the highway there, so it's easy to miss it. But the lock is still there. It's not in good shape, but it's still there.
That's the one right when you get into Henry County?
Yep.
Okay. Lock 42?
43.
43?
Yep.
That's right.
Now, we would go, the way we got to the Buckland Lock, back in the days when the canal was running, there was no towpath on this side. The canal went all the way up to the mill, so there was no place there for the mules to cross over. So they had that little bridge that was on the east side of our lock. There was a bridge there then, and the mules would cross over that bridge and go to the towpath on the north side of the canal. And they would pull us from this side all the way down to where the water comes in from the Maumee River. Because they built the Providence Dam to create a slack water, or like a reservoir on the river, that would fill the canal all the way to Toledo. So for 30 miles, that was the only water source for the canal. And the mules would take us out, and where the water comes into the canal, they'd pull us out along the shore. And we'd be going along the north shore of the Maumee River for 1.25 miles till we got to the Buckland Lock, and then we get back into the canal proper. They had that same kind of arrangement closer to Defiance. The Independence Dam was built for the same reason, to create a slack water that would feed the canal all the way to the Buckland Lock. And then the boats would go in out after the lock there at Independence. They pull them onto the river, and they go along the north shore of the Maumee River till they got into Defiance, and there was a mule bridge that went all the way across the Maumee River. The mules would take that bridge, pull the boats across to the first lock in Defiance, and then they were back in the canal proper. In the early days, this would go from 1840 to about 1853. You could go to Fort Wayne. You get down 12 miles south of Defiance, you get to Junction, and at Junction you take a right turn and go over toward Fort Wayne. You go into Fort Wayne. But in 1843 or 1845, when the Miami-Erie Canal was completed, then you could either go straight at Junction and go to Cincinnati, or you could turn right and go to Fort Wayne. And they closed that off in around 1853, right in that area. Now, the horn was a very important part of canal boat life. It was essential. It was an essential thing to have on the canal, because if you got about 1/4 mile from a lock, they'd blow that horn. That let the lockmaster know that the boat was coming, and then the lockmaster could open the gates for you. Now, if there's a boat coming from the other direction and it blew its horn, the lockmaster would determine which one was closest to the lock, and he'd open the gate for that particular boat. So if you got to that lock, we got to that lock, and the gate was closed, we just pull off to the side and wait for that gate to open and the other boat to clear. The other reason is for low bridges, and there were 2 reasons for that. One is that these low bridges often connected at one farmer's land. So, you know, he'd have fields on both sides. So the bridge would connect those two so that they could go back and forth to the different fields. And that if you blew the horn, the farmer knew you were coming. So he might send some of the kids out or the wife out, and they would do business from these bridges. And they'd bring a basket. They'd say, I've got eggs here. Would you like some eggs? Say yes. They'll tell you the price. When you got to the bridge, he'd lower down the basket with the eggs in them. You dump those eggs into your basket, and you put the money in his basket, and he'd haul it back up. So that all had to be done within seconds, because it doesn't take long for a boat to clear the bridge. One farmer would put a potato in the basket, and once you cleared the stuff and he pulled the basket up, he'd go over to the side, and the boat people would put their money to stuff it in the potato, and then throw it to him on the shore. They gave him a little extra time to do that. But the other reason is, if there's a low bridge and there are people riding on top, that definitely let them know that there's a low bridge coming, and they had folding chairs that they could have up there. They'd have to fold down the chair, and then depending on how high the bridge is, they'd have to do anything from lay down flat to, you know, they could bend down like this. But if there was ever any confusion as to how high that bridge was for them, they'd just lay down flat so they didn't get knocked off in the canal. And that was very common, for people to misjudge the height of the bridge and get knocked out into the canal. This is a nice day for this ride. There's not a lot of traffic out there to distract us. You can hear the birds. It's nice. It's more like it was back when the canal was running. You could hear nature. You could hear the wind in the trees. You could hear the birds. Oh, mosquitoes.
I love where I live because that's all you hear is the birds around me. You hear the birds. Was it a couple weeks ago when I was out here with Grandma? A bunch of motorcycles went by and was, did you hear about mosquitoes? Yes.
Yeah, they used to, mosquitoes were a big problem in this area because of the Great Black Smoke. There's still a lot of mosquitoes. And I've seen things written about clouds of mosquitoes that would descend on the canal boats. And there's nothing you can do about it. Now, what we're going to do now was illegal to do on the canal back
Step
then.
back for just a moment. I gotta sling this rope over, and as soon as it's down and around, you're more welcome to step back up.
Because the canal was, in most places, 40 feet wide. Boats were 78 feet wide. So I don't care if you're doing new math or old math or making up your own math, you can't turn around a 78-foot boat in a 40-foot wide canal. But they tried. They apparently tried enough times that the legislature made it against the law to turn around in the canal. So you could turn around, and if Lockmaster saw you or the towpath walker, there was always somebody from the state walking the towpath. And his main job was to look and see if there were areas where the towpath had washed out a little bit, and he'd do, some repair work on that. If there was too much repair for him to do with his shovel, he'd get word to the state boat, the maintenance boats that ran up and down the canal, and they'd come and fix it properly. But he could, if he saw you driving too fast, riding too fast, or if he saw you turning around in the canal or trying to, and stop the boat, get on, and find you. There were usually special turnaround places for the canal, so if you needed to turn around, like down here, if they wanted to, if they were only going as far as Providence, they could turn that boat around in the river. They just put the mules on board and use those big pipe poles, those big 10-foot long poles. They'd use those to maneuver the boat around so that it was turned around, and then they'd hook the mules back up and head back. And in some places there were what they called wide waters. There was one of those in Texas, down the road here. And, they'd turn around in the wide water and come back. Now, have any of you been over to Grand Rapids across the river? No. Well, there's a side cut canal over there. And the canal goes from the dam down pretty much to out of town there, to the end of the village. And that canal was put in because in the early 1840s, there was a mill down there, Purdy's Mill. And when they put in the Providence Dam, they built the dam all the way across the river. Originally, it was a wooden dam, and it cut off the water to Mr. Purdy's mill. So Mr. Purdy and some of his friends went back one night and blew up the dam. Well, the state wasn't happy with that. They came back out, they put the dam back up, had militia out there with rifles and things. And when about a week after they finished rebuilding the dam in that place, and the militia saw there wasn't any trouble, they just packed up and went home. Then Mr. Purdy and his friends went back out and blew the dam up again. So at this point, the state went over there, found out that it was Purdy and his friends blowing up the dam, and he told them why. He said, "You're cutting off my water source. I have the right to that water because I'm a landowner right here on the river. I have the right to that water." And they said, "Well, look, here's what we'll do. How about if we build a separate dam for you and have a side cut canal here that goes into town, flows out into your mill race. How would that be? He liked that idea. He signed a lease with the state for that purpose. They built that canal, that side cut, and with a lock over there that they could regulate the amount of water coming into it, and everything was fine after that. The boats that wanted to go across the river, they just put the mules on board and pull across the river and get into that side cut canal and do business in Grand Rapids as well.
At the time, it was called the Gilead Side Cut Canal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think the town was called Gilead, but I don't remember anything
Gilead
about that.
until, let's see, 76, about 1868 is when they changed the name.
Oh, okay. It's really neat. The Independence Dam used to be a wood dam also when it was first built.
Yep.
Yep. And there's a cemetery pretty close to the Independence Dam where the canal builders were buried when they would start dying of malaria and such, because there was a lot of that going on in those days.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah.
In fact, they closed down the building of this canal for 3 months in 1839 because so many of the workers were sick.
Oh, really?
That they couldn't do any work anyway, so they just halted work on it until the fall when the mosquitoes were gone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah, it was tough building this canal, especially in this area, because it was mostly swamp and it was mud and muck. One fella that was talking about later said that sometimes they had mud and muck clear up to their vests that they were digging in. And
Wow.
all they had were shovels, picks, wheelbarrows, and their own strong backs to do it.
Yeah.
And in some of the places, like over in Texas, over in Henry County, when they were building that, then they had some of those scrapers that they used. They were able to use those because the ground was a little better. But those things wouldn't have worked in most of the areas that they were building from here to Toledo. So when they just took the dirt from here, put it up on the towpath on the side, and they had a separate team that was building the towpath out of that dirt that was taken out of here.
Oh, wow.
And in this area anyway, a lot of the workers worked barefoot because the mud and the muck ate away the leather on their shoes.
Oh, wow.
So they'd work barefoot in here to keep their shoes, so
Dang.
they could wear them another day.
So now, was this portion original to the canal, or was it part of the 424?
No, this is part of the canal. This was
All right, because I know like up in Anthony Wayne Trail,
Yes.
that was the original canal, and then they paved it all over.
Yep. The canal went from here to Waterville, and at the place up there where the Anthony Wayne Trail meets River Road, right over by Farnsworth Park and Rush to Boo there, where it lies off there, that's where the canal met what is now the Anthony Wayne Trail. So from there on, you're riding on the canal bed.
Gotcha. Okay. I was always curious about that, because like I know when you get through Henry County and Defiance County, they still have portions of the canal that you can walk along, but I always assumed that it was just, something that they had redug up years later after they. I assumed that the whole road was the canal and they just paved over it.
There were some portions like this one. This wasn't built until around 1935.
Oh, okay.
And but in 1929, the state decided that they were going to build the Anthony Wayne Trail, and they couldn't because there was a portion of the canal from Providence Dam to Maumee, the next lock over, and that still had water in it because there was a hydroelectric plant over there that used the water from the canal to power, to make electricity. And they couldn't, the power plant had a lease, and the Ludwig Mill had a lease too. It was a similar lease for using excess water in the canal to provide electricity. And so the state legislature passed a law saying that everything from the Providence Dam to Toledo had to be drained so they could build the trail. And the hydroelectric plant and the mill took them to court. And it ended up at the United States Supreme Court.
Oh, wow.
The Supreme Court ruled that since the canal was officially closed in 1913, that there was no transportation on the canal. And the lease said that they got the water surplus to navigation on the canal. Well, if there's no transportation on the canal, there's no navigation. There's no navigation, there's no water surplus to navigation. So the state was within its rights to drain the canal. So they ended up draining it from the end of our lock all the way to Toledo. And they left it in here because the original owner of this mill property was a fellow named Peter Manor. And they took a lot of his land here for the canal. And they even took his sawmill that he had. They raised that, and he lost that. The original agreement with the state of Ohio for them taking his land was that he got enough water from the canal to run 2 runs of stone for a sawmill in that property, and then enough for 6 runs of stone to run a grist mill on this side. Well, the state even built the mill race for him there.
Really?
That pen stock that we have under the mill there, that was built by the state of Ohio.
Oh, wow.
To complete that agreement. Well, they found out 2 years later that there was enough to run a sawmill, but there wasn't enough to run a grist mill, so they had a different agreement. That agreement was that, he didn't have that, and he still had the 2 runs of stones, and they gave him another $2,800 for his trouble. Well, the free water from the state, because it was taken under eminent domain, is in the deed. So the state couldn't pass a law taking away the mill's right to that.
Nice.
They could do leases on top of that, but they couldn't do anything about the deed. And that's why we still use water from the canal, and the canal stayed open this far.
That's
now,
really
in
awesome.
1935, when they built the road here, there was still water in the lock up to the high water mark. And at that point, there were people, kids were swimming in here. There's about 14 feet of water under this boat right now. And kids were swimming in there, and sometimes they were getting hurt, so they decided to fill in the lock up to the high water mark. And when they did that, they took off they put a berm up over on that side. They drained this part so they could empty out the lock. They took the whaler gates off both sides, dumped them in the lock, and then filled it in with dirt up to the high water mark. So in the early 1990s, the Metroparks came in with a backhoe and dug this out so they could see if the lock was in good enough shape to run the canal experience. And what they found down there, they found the remnants of those whaler gates, but they also found the wicket gates, the gates under the water that open and close, let the water in. So we're still using 5 of those wicket gates, 5 of those 8 gates were usable, and they've just transferred them to our new, every 10 years they transfer them to our new whaler gates, and so we're still using 5 wickets from the 1800s.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
So yeah, in 1929 they emptied this out and they were able to build the trail.
Nice. Is the wicket gate on display over here? One of the originals? Okay, cool. That's awesome.
One of the 3. Another one is at Johnston Farm and Indian Agency in Piqua.
Okay, I photographed that one too.
Museum. And the other one, I don't remember where it's on display, but it's on display in a museum someplace.
Yeah. I'm going to have to find that.
Now there are 3 types of stone in our lock. The top layer, the very top layer, that's sandstone. Then below that you see 4 levels of nicely cut limestone. That limestone came from Marblehead in Kelly's Island. They brought it up the Maumee River on flat-bottom boats as far as they could, and then by wagon the rest of the way. But down below the water line, and if you can see out there, you can probably see it, some of those stones right now. all of the stones that were under the water line were quarried from the bottom of the Maumee River across the Broadwood Mill. The thought at the time was that limestone had been sitting underwater for thousands of years, so it would hold up better underwater in the lock than the dry stuff they pulled out of the ground at Marblehead. And it's still there, still in good condition, so I guess you can't argue with their logic on that. Now, the reason our lock is in such good shape is because of two things. One of them is when they filled it into the high water line in 1935, because in a lot of cases in side-cut Metropark, those locks were, were a problem for a little while, because on the outside of the lock there's pressure from the earth. It's pushing these rocks inward. And if there's nothing on this side to push back, then those walls will fall in. That happened over at Sidecut, happened at Lockington, and a number of other places where the lock walls were just falling in like that. And in both of those cases, they've gone back and shored them up so that they're upright. But they didn't have to do that. The other reason is, back then, the locks had wooden floors. They were made out of a hard wood, like a white oak, like our gates are made out of. And in the wintertime, they would drain the locks, they would check the wood, make sure it was okay. If they needed to change some out, they would do that. But after the canal closed, nobody did that maintenance. So the wood deteriorated, and as it deteriorated, the weight of these lock walls pushed down and caused the lock walls to crumble and then eventually fall in. But down here, when they dug down, they saw that the bedrock was limestone. So instead of putting hardwood on top of limestone to stack the limestone walls on, they just stacked the limestone walls on top of the bedrock. So there was nothing to deteriorate and cause these walls to settle.
Nice.
So those two things are why, those two reasons are why our locks are in such good shape. We're able to use them.
Interesting. Did they ever use wood locks on the Miami area?
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, most of the locks from Buckland down to New Bremen, most of those locks were wooden locks.
Oh.
And in the early 1900s, when the state was coming through and they were spending a lot of money to rebuild the canal and make it viable again, all of those locks that were wooden were made into concrete locks.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that was part of the thing. You know, they came in. There was so little traffic on the canal from around 1879 to 1900 that there were some who wanted to just close the canal, but some other ones, and they got the votes, was to keep the canal, redo it so it was more viable, and give the boat owners an incentive to get back on the canal. So they gave them, their incentive was, if they built new boats, or they took their old boat and renovated it so that it was in good shape, that if the canal closed down, then if the state closed the canal, then they would get reimbursement for their expenses.
Oh, nice.
And so that brought a lot more traffic onto the canal after it was rebuilt in the early 1900s. And then, of course, 1913, Mother Nature had her vote, and that 1913 flood just closed everything.
Yeah.
How you talk about the washboard road? That's what they used to do when we washed clothes. Yeah?
They still tried to salvage it up till like the 20s, didn't they, though?
Yeah.
But it just
Yeah, in
kept
some
failing.
parts. In some parts. Even around 1900, they passed a law that allowed in certain areas for them to have electric boats, and they would put the poles up on usually on the heel path side, because the law said they couldn't interfere with the animals on the tow path. So they put these things up on the heel path side, electrical wires, and then just like the interurban trains and things like that, they had a wire running from there, from the boat to those electrical lines, and that's how they would power them. They
Sounds-
did that in a couple of places down closer to Cincinnati, and
Yeah.
it just didn't work out very well.
Yeah, it sounds real dangerous.
It probably was.
Yeah.
But, you know, electricity was a big thing then, you know, so they wanted to try it.
Oh yeah,
Thought
for
it was
sure.
good. But they abandoned that after a few years. It just
Yeah.
wasn't working out well.
Yeah, I've never even heard of that.
Well, I found it when I was looking at looking for information about the rebuilding of the canal.
Hmm.
And so I found a reference to it, to that bill, and then I looked back and found it.
That's
And I was
interesting.
able to find some information about
Yeah, I'm gonna look into that definitely. That's neat.
No.
I've been researching canals for like 10 years now, so I love it.
Do you know how this is to wash clothes for clothes back then, Lily? You think doing laundry now is hard? Do laundry back then in the water that we're riding in was also the bath water, the cooking water.
Yeah, and if you're washing your clothes in that water
Yep.
too.
And if you didn't know how to swim, they just tie a rope to you and throw you in.
Yep.
They let you dunk a couple of times and then you were clean.
Yeah, they actually had harnesses. So somebody her age would have a harness that she would wear, and it would have either a chain or a rope, and they would tie it to something here in the boat. So she could run around as much as she wanted for the length of that rope. If she fell off, it was long enough. It was only long enough so that she would fall down certain ways, but she wouldn't fall in the water.
Cool.
And if they didn't have a harness, they would just tie a rope around them and let them run around. But the kids were always taught to swim. A lot of the boatmen didn't know how to swim, but they made sure their kids knew how, because that could save their life.
I know how to swim. This is the closest I get to the water. Yep. Because I'm afraid of water. Can't swim a lick of my life, but I made sure all my kids could. And I taught her how to swim. I'm still trying to teach her.
Now, do you know if they have any of those harnesses on display anywhere?
No, we made one.
Oh yeah.
For a program I did on life on a canal boat a few years ago, but then we lost it. It's gone someplace. You know, we had that 2 years off, and I went looking for it last year, and I couldn't find it.
Aw.
And I looked again this year, and so somebody probably saw this and said, "What's this?" and then just threw it out.
Yeah.
You see those pelts on the those are animal pelts. That's what they eat. You know how Mom keeps joking around about getting a squirrel? Yes, that's what they would eat back in the day.
Yeah, they go
Squirrel,
out
deer.
hunting, and sometimes the muskrats, they'd swim up and down and back and forth in the canal. So there were a lot of them. And in fact, this is the muskrat pelt. And the muskrats, they didn't like the muskrats because they would, you can hold it. They would burrow into these towpaths. And when they burrowed in, they burrowed like gophers, you know, they'd go in and then around and so forth. And it would make the towpath weak.
That's where his head was.
And so if you got a really big rain, it might wash out the towpath. And then the mules couldn't go and the boats couldn't go. So they put a bounty on the muskrats for a while. So if you caught them, you kept the pelt, you gave it to an agent down the line, probably at one of the toll places like Napoleon or Defiance, and they give them sometimes up to a nickel a piece for these things. And that helped keep the population down and helped keep them from having to spend a lot of extra money on rebuilding the towpaths.
And a nickel was a lot back then, Lily.
It was.
Considering you travel for a mile for 3 cents.
Yeah.
On a boat.
Yep.
I love Mama.
Did you kids like to hear a song about our mules?
Oh yeah.
Our mules are named Sally and Molly. And when we turn around here in a little bit, you'll see them walking out here. Sally's in the front, Molly's in the back. They've been with us for 19 years. Wow. So they know this towpath and this canal better than all of us who work on here combined, including their Hogan Jake. And they're his mules. But we're still finding out things that they know that he doesn't. Sally and Molly greeted the day, smelling coffee, Johnny cakes, and a bale of hay. They're rested and ready and full of pep. Cincinnati gets closer step by step. Hitch 'em up, let 'em go. Those good old mules walk real slow, but they'll get you where you want to go on this Ohio Canal. You gotta speak their language or they won't go where they'll walk too fast for canal boat tow. They'll walk with the hoagie along the path, and after 6 hours they can take a nap. Hitch 'em up, let 'em go. Those good old mules walk real slow, but they'll get you where you want to go on this Ohio Canal. They could be pulling plows in a farmer's field and breaking up Ohio clay, but they'd rather be pulling our old canal boat, 'cause walking beats working all day. Hitch 'em up, let 'em go. Those good old mules walk real slow, but they'll get you where you want to go on this Ohio Canal. The boats back then usually had mule stables in them, so they could carry 2 sets of mules. That way the mules could work for 6 hours or maybe 8, never usually more than 8 hours, but 6 to 8 hours. They'd work that hard, and then the boat would pull over, you'd switch out the mules. The fresh mules would go out onto the towpath, the tired mules would come back on into their stable and have 6 hours of rest before they had to go out again.
Watch out, Malone. We'll sling a rope.
Because we're turning. You gonna turn around? You guys are so tired, you're making Momo tired. You're putting with our video. No, but Sissy is. I'm surprised she left Buckley at home. I don't think we gave her a choice. We got her straight back. Exactly. Because she does not leave the house without that thing.
Get in here and do some real work. Step back for just a minute. I can throw this rope through these first 2 windows so we can dock. Now, if you had breakfast on this boat, and your 3 cents usually included these 2 meals, breakfast and supper. And the breakfast would have been eggs of some sort, boiled or poached eggs, and some kind of meat, maybe ham or bacon, some boiled beef. You'd have biscuits or cornbread. You'd you'd have pancakes or Johnny cakes, which are cornmeal pancakes. And you'd sweeten them up with some wildflower honey or making sure he gets that rope. So they have wildflower honey or molasses to sweeten up those pancakes. So that was a good breakfast. And it was always easy for them to find fresh produce along the way because a lot of the lockmasters had gardens. The state would give them, attached to the lock someplace, or close to the lock, an acre of land. They could do with that whatever they wanted. And a lot of them had gardens because then they could grow food and sell them to the canal boats. And here at Providence, they had an apple orchard across the canal. And that way, you could sell apples to the canal boat crews and to the passengers.